Hey, let's go live when the natural music fade actually happens. That might actually almost sound like I'm doing things with purpose. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Although we don't quite have enough purpose to have tweeted already. So, hey, the tweet's out. People know tacitly that I am streaming. And as is, what's that thing? Tradition. I feel like my noise gate isn't working, but hey, what are you going to do? Hear the creaky chair in the background of this entire video. Sa, ne, me. So how is everyone? Happy Saturday. I hope everyone is chilling like villains. I just finished a fun stream with Mr. Bear Atheist talking about Ninja Scroll, and since I'm here, my lights are on, my OBS is going, and apparently I have a background sound somewhere. Is this, are you no, you're muted. I've got, it's the chat box. It is the chat box. Mother loving chat box. How do I, this one? Yes. Found you. Shut up. Excellent. Fantastic. So how's everyone doing? We're doing all right. It's sadly Sunday, and it feels like I haven't had enough of a weekend, even though we had a public holiday on Wednesday. So I have no right to not feel relaxed and rejuvenated for work. But being a filthy communist, I do want to work less. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Noise effect gate is on. I don't know. Let's try and up it in the morning. So we are going to do a bit of a stream. Weekly reminder that YouTube is shit in terms of making their platform accessible to people with low vision. And again, I'm stuck with web chat and trying to use that as it relates to navigating any people I pop into chat to say hi. So as always, apologies if I don't see you chat. I'm working as hard as I can, but YouTube is not meeting me halfway. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do? So I did want to try and start getting into the habit of doing these on Fridays. Unfortunately, this Friday I wasn't feeling super awesome. 100% self-inflicted, because on Thursday, a few things happened. Pokemon Arceus came out at midnight on Thursday night, and a game I'd never heard of before released on Steam called Not for Broadcast. And I've played that on Twitch for like 12 hours since then. Granted that the majority of that was like the first stream on Thursday night. My plan was to play Not for Broadcast from about 6:30 all the way through until 11 o'clock or midnight, depending on what time Pokemon came out, and switch across. That game was too amazingly good for me to stop until I found a natural stopping point, which was about 12:30, 12:45, something like that. And then by the time I tried to switch over to Pokemon Arceus, there were some issues with the HDMI splitter and stuff, so we didn't actually get to Pokemon Arceus. But we got so fully enwrapped in this censorship, news, mass media simulation game that I couldn't wait to play it again. And I had to play it on stream because, you know, I had a few people that joined in on the initial stream, and I wanted to play it, you know, finish it on stream as well. So we did that today. And my goodness, is that game not one of the best games that I've played in a long time? Particularly given it's a conceptual game. So it's not a game where you jump down and you've got a character that you've got to play, and you know, A is jump, B is run, left stick is to run, right stick is to look. Like, it's not that sort of game. It is, you are sitting at your editing desk for a news studio and you control the edit. And the choices you make determine where the game goes, where the story goes. Very timely, particularly given the type of content I do, where I sort of look at what gets discussed and how it gets discussed, and I participate that in myself. And I like to think that I'm fairly balanced in terms of what level of credence I give to different ideas. It doesn't mean that I don't shy away from having my preference on what I think is a good idea versus what is a bad idea, because I can be very opinionated on things, and we can see that particularly, you know, in the comments to the video just a bit over a week ago now. where we've started having dialogue with someone who watched my video. They did complain I mumbled, so I apologize. I will try to enunciate a little bit more this time. And I'll be mindful that I give a bit more of a clear view on some of the things that we are going to talk about today. Of course, the issue is that, straw manning is going to be straw manning, and it doesn't matter how clear you are, your view might get misrepresented, but all we can do is continue to talk, and hopefully we can learn a little bit more about each other. So today, now I said this when I was on Mr. Bear's stream, I don't want to become a Jordan Peterson channel. I don't want to do it because the man is frankly fairly boring majority of the time. I think the interesting things about Peterson are not what he says, but who is getting him to say it. Like when he speaks, what people are platforming him, who is listening to him, because he talks nonsense. But there are certainly particular places that seem to platform him more than others. I'll bite the bullet on the fact that I'm in the camp that Joe Rogan operates as a conservative commentator. I don't care that he positions himself as a centrist. I think when you look at the voices that he amplifies and the voices that he is resistant to, or the voices that he is antagonistic in an academic sense to on his podcast, I think it's quite clear that he favors conservative views, particularly when it comes to personal freedom over social cohesion and social responsibility. And from that perspective, I'm quite comfortable with saying, yes, he's a conservative voice. He operates in the conservative pipeline. And they're the type of calls that I think are fair to make. It's the same with, who's that fucking idiot? Tim Pool, where Tim Pool will claim to be... he'll claim to not fall on either side, but he will continually praise conservative views while critiquing social views. And I think it's useful to be able to actually articulate that no, what they do, what they position themselves as, follows a very particular narrative and has a very particular outcome, and we can drive ourselves through outcomes when it comes to categorizing how people are operating in our social structure, and I think that's perfectly fair. I find that people that don't want people to be categorized when it comes to the way they participate in society are people that want to have plausible deniability for the outcomes of their actions or inactions, which I think is quite cowardly. Like, you need to stand by your convictions and stuff, and I know it's not necessarily popular to have socialist views when it comes to the workplace, but I'm not going to shy away from saying, hey, I think a democratic workplace will be fantastic. That in itself, like a democratic workplace instead of a socialist workplace, like that's language that's very specifically chosen to impact the initial impression someone has of an idea. It's the same as the pro-life versus pro-choice. Like, both sides of that coin are obviously identifying with terms that seem to be as positive as possible as it relates to they are positive assertions of a pro position, despite the fact their outcomes are very different. Polar opposite, in fact. And so from those outcomes, we can quite happily say that pro-choice is infinitely more moral than pro-life. So that's a bit of a preamble. That's giving people a bit of a time to find the link and click it. So I think anyone that's going to find the link and click it has found it by now. Okay, someone's commented saying apparently it was a train wreck. I've gone in spoiler free. Excellent. Let's go. How long is this clip anyway? Where is it? There's 1, 2, 3. Wait, what the fuck? Jordan Peterson on Joker? That's one of the topics? Are you shitting me? What is the SEO around Joe Rogan putting out like 1.5 minute clips? Right, where does Peterson start? Okay, so there's 3 Peterson clips by the looks of it. Jordan Peterson about the Bible. He's not explicitly religious, is he? I can never remember this about Peterson. Like, I know Ben Shapiro is Jewish. Stephen Crowder, he's a Christian, right? I know Caitlin Bennett announced that she was Catholic now. But Peterson, it's not a big part of his shtick. Granted, a lot of his shtick has to do with like academia and stuff, faux academics. So let's start recording. All right, hi, welcome back, everyone. We are doing another video on the man, the myth, the legend, Jordan Peterson. This time, he's going to be merging his mind with the mighty thinker, Joe Rogan. Now, not a lot of love lost between me and these fine communicators. But today, we're going to have a look at the discussion that they had recently. I've heard a lot of talk about it. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen any commentary about it. I vaguely know that the climate comes up at some point, which is good news because I've had someone in my last video chat to me about the ridiculous nature by which climate activists are being far too robust in the level of fear they're trying to spread. So it'll be interesting to see how Jordan Peterson couches this. In terms of his academic experience as a sociologist or whatever the fuck he does. I know he's not a climatologist, so hey, why not? You know, I'm happy for anyone to speak on any subject. I think the only critique I have necessarily is that I am pretty confident that Jordan Peterson relies a lot on the fact that he has an academic history to sort of lead other people to believe he has got a level of authority that may be unwarranted in particular fields that he starts to talk about. Particularly, you know, things like law and justice, you know, how the legal system may or may not work with particular bills in Canada from which he rose to prominence. So we're going to check out this little chat. There's 3 segments. It's about 20 minutes all up, maybe a little bit under 20 minutes. We'll see how long it takes us to get through this. Let's check it out. This is all spoiler free for me. This is all new. This is like sitting down to watch Avengers Endgame. I'm excited. I'm optimistic we're going to get some bangers out of this. Let's go. With volume, preferably.
Categories
Volume. Volume. Over here. Woo. Browser. Right the fuck down. Oh yeah.
Dissolve, especially
Come out.
fundamental ones.
Swinging,
The culture
Jordan.
is dissolving because the culture is a structure of category. That's what it is.
Right.
So, and in fact, culture is a structure of category that we all share.
God, I feel like he's just making everything up as he goes. Like I feel like he doesn't have a thought before he starts his sentence, and he just goes, "Hey, I'm going to start talking about culture," and then he just constructs his thought on the fly because holy shit, what did he just say? I'm going to be careful because that makes it easy for people to criticize me for just not understanding this mammoth thinker. But let's have a think of that sentence again.
If categories dissolve, especially fundamental ones, the culture is dissolving.
Okay, I'm going to make the assumption he's currently talking about categories as they relate to gender, race, disability, sexual orientation, like all the issues that he fundamentally has with equality in terms of measuring success. That's my presumption, but hey, go off Joe Rogan for posting this clip without the context of what a category is so far.
Because the culture is a structure of category. That's what it is.
Right.
So, and in fact, culture is a structure of category that we all share. So we see things the same way. Well, that's why we can talk. I mean, not exactly the same way, because then we'd have nothing to talk about. But roughly speaking, we have a bedrock of agreement. That's the Bible, by the way.
Oh, fuck me. Good thing we used to be an atheist YouTuber, so we can talk about this. I reject so far that the way that he talks about culture being a structure of categories. To me, culture is an intersection of people. To talk about it as categories is, I think, to oversimplify what culture is. Culture is how we all view the world and how those viewpoints mix together when we exist in a society. So, for example, the culture that I live in, being here in Australia, is one where I can go out in the morning, you go to a farmer's markets, and I can either have some Brazilian corn cakes, or I can have some Thai satay chicken with some mango sticky rice, or I can have some Vietnamese street food, or I can have some bacon and eggs at a local cafe. That is the culture in that, certainly from a food sense, that I get to live with and around all these other things intersecting, and it's sort of messy and fun and interesting. It gives texture. So he's right, you don't have anything to talk about if there's no difference in your culture, but the way he stratifies it as a categorization of people being shared, I didn't know the category of people that I was interacting with today, yet our culture still mixed and mingled, and there was still interaction there that I think makes culture what culture is. Let's let him continue, because this bold claim that it's all based on the Bible, bold claim. Why aren't you playing?
So I just walked through the Museum of the Bible in Washington. That was very cool. It's a very cool museum.
So the structure, that's what the Bible
Yeah, it's what
provides.
I figured out. I just figured this out this week. So it was a cool...
Thank God that Peterson could figure out this week that the Bible is the structure of all society. This is amazing.
It was a cool thing to walk through because it's chronological. They have one floor, which is the history of the Bible. But it's not exactly that. It's really what it is the history of the book. Now, in many ways, the first book was the Bible.
If I was going to talk about the Bible as being an authoritative structural foundation to culture, the first thing I would do is be very careful about how I talk about it. I wouldn't make any ridiculous claims like it is the first book. I wouldn't refer to it as a book. I would recognize that it is 66 books that have been combined together to form the canon of scripture that is, primarily accepted by the major forms of Christianity. And I would move from there. I wouldn't actually start to get into this pretty close to woo Christianity, where they think that the primacy of the Bible makes it the first book. Interesting start.
Because...
Well, not literally. That, at best, that can be a fucking figurative. It is the first book because it deals with the first things of man. But not literally. It is...
There's only one book. Like, as far as our Western culture is concerned, there was one book. And for a while, literally, there was only one book. And that book was the Bible. And then before it was the Bible, it was it was scrolls and it was writings on papyrus. But we were starting to
what the fuck is he talking
the
about?
text together. And it went through all sorts of technological transformations, and then it became books that everybody could buy.
So there's a way of speaking that is technically correct, but functionally useless. And I think referring to the method with which the Bible was transcribed as technical transformations is functionally useless, but technically true. I'm going to criticize it for being poor communication, not for being technically inaccurate. And this is exactly the behavior that Peterson engages in to try and create this false sense of authority on what he says. He dresses it up in what people might think of as academic language, when feels to me like there's a fairly broad misunderstanding of what academic language actually is. One of the things that was sort of most strongly embedded in my understanding of, how to navigate academia when it comes to the language we use is that if you cannot say something simply, you don't understand the concept. So the more highly engaged you are with highly technical and specific words, the less you actually understand it in context of talking to people who are not part of a particular specialty or a particular area of study. So for example, if a doctor is going to use their academic understanding of whatever's wrong with you, and they tell you that using their textbook language, that's useless to the most sort of everyday people. Like the ability for a doctor to speak to you in words that the most average people can understand, that's actually a demonstration the doctor knows what they're talking about. Peterson is like that, like the doctor that can't tell you what's wrong with you without using the textbook language that is designed for people that are already engaged with the subject. He can't actually dumb it down. And I think that's fundamentally an example of why I believe he doesn't actually have functional ideas behind the things he says. He just has these sort of broad statements that he feels intuitively jive with whatever his preferred ideology is. In this case, that the Bible is structurally the foundation of culture. But because that's not true, he can't actually talk directly to the topic. He needs to talk in these elevated academic terms about the Bible being one book, at least in Western cultures, that has gone through technological transformations over the ages, as the ecclesial have gathered together different manuscripts and papyrus. Like, it's ridiculous. And I want to oscillate between mocking people that are bought in by this and that fall for this. But at the same time, like, I mean, it is tough when people are confident and speaking in ways that are hard to navigate and pick apart. It's easy if they're saying something that is palatable to your current worldview already to accept that as, hey, yeah, that sounds really intriguing. That's actually really cool. I like what you're saying. I'm a Christian and I think, you know, the Bible is the foundation of culture and we do need to really make sure we protect that.
The book everybody could buy, and the first one of those was the Bible, and then it became all sorts of books that everybody could buy. But all those books, in some sense, emerged out of that underlying book. And that book itself, the Bible...
Right, so his claim that it's the first book is that it is the first commercial book that was available to buy. That's an incredibly narrow way of phrasing the first book. I wouldn't be confident making that claim, but at the same time, I also wouldn't be sure. I wouldn't be surprised if it was technically true that the Bible was the first thing. Actually, let's see. What was the first book for sale? You'd think it'd be a newspaper or something, like something that could be easily copied on a press. What was the first book? Okay, the first book ever written was known as the Epic of Gilgamesh. Right, so not a Bible, not the Bible. First book. Yeah, was the first book for sale. First book on Amazon? No, I don't think so. I know the Bible is the bestseller. Like, I'm not going to contend with that. What was the first book printed for sale? I suppose a newspaper wouldn't count because it's not technically a book. The Gutenberg Bible. There we go. I should have known that. That's in Civilization. All right, let's keep going.
It isn't a book, it's a library. It's a collection of books. And so what I figured out was, partly because I was talking to my brother-in-law, Jim Keller, who's the world's greatest chip designer and has now designed a chip that's as powerful as the human brain, which is optimized for artificial intelligence learning, by the way. And so I talked to him about that. He said, "You heard of the internet?" I said, "Yeah, Jim, I've heard of the internet." He said, "This is way more revolutionary than that." So in any case, we were talking about meaning in text because we were talking about translation and the problem of understanding text. And Jim said, the meaning of words is coded in the relationship of the words to one another. And the postmodernists make that case, that all meaning is derived from the relationship between words. That's wrong. Well, what about rage? That's not words. And what about moving your hand? That's not words. So it's wrong, but part of it's right.
I feel like the context with which you move your hand has a very large bearing on how that movement is decoded into intent by another person. The problem is he's not explicit enough with what he's talking about in context that it's hard to explicitly pick apart how he's wrong, because he's not giving enough information. He's giving a feeling. He's giving a vagary instead of a statement. And so he can always walk back. He can always have people say, "Oh, well, you didn't listen to him in context," or "No, what he really meant was B, not A." Very frustrating.
Because the meaning we derive from the verbal domain is encoded in the relationship between words. So now then you think, well, let's think about the relationship between words. Well, some words are dependent on other words. Some ideas are dependent on other ideas.
He's jumped from words to ideas. So there is an impact with how we think and how we conceptualize things based on what language we speak and what ideas we have access to with shorthand. So that's part of the reason why education is so important, is it allows us to think in shorthand, so to speak, when it comes to complex ideas. A good example of that is when you start to figure out shortcuts in maths. So for example, when you're learning your 9 times tables, you start to learn that at least up until 9 times 10, anything below that, the first 2 digits add up to 9. So it's a really easy shortcut to go 9 times 8. Well, it's going to be 7, and because it adds up to 9, it's 72. That pattern makes it very easy. So instead of going 9 plus 9 plus 9 plus 9, like, that's what I mean by, like, when you start to think of even other concepts. Another example that's probably a bit more direct to language is when we think about how people communicate with each other. It's not just that what I say explicitly is the meaning that a listener or someone listening to this broadcast will take away from it. It's, well, I'm encoding my message with the experiences and the ideas and the things that I believe, and I need to assume that people listening have access to the same ideas, experiences, and beliefs that I have, so that when they decode my message, they get the same thoughts in their head. It's really interesting to think about, and that's why the relationship between words is so important, is that we get words that have contextual clues to them that help determine whether it's a positive or a negative relationship. So, for example, what's one off the top of my head? God, we're doing this live. Shit, fuck. Okay, so here's a good example. I could say something. I don't want to say the C word, because not everyone's in Australia with the same sensibilities. That shit is mad. That shit is mad. That shit is mad. That shit is mad. Okay, I'm showing my age a little bit here, but that could either be a positive or a negative. Like, I could be like, someone is doing a sweet ollie in Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. That shit is mad. Or I could be watching Jordan Peterson talking to Joe Rogan and be like, that shit is mad. So the relationship between those words is very important, in that the broader context of the sentence is going to determine what the meaning is. The fact that he rejects that, except for this one thing, ridiculous.
The more ideas are dependent on a given idea, the more fundamental that idea is. That's a definition of fundamental. So now imagine you have an aggregation of texts in a civilization. You say, which are the fundamental texts? And the answer is the texts upon which most other texts depend. And so you'd put Shakespeare way in there in English, because so many texts are dependent on Shakespeare's literary revelations. And Milton would be in that category, and Dante would be in that category, at least in translation. Fundamental authors, part of the Western canon, not because of the arbitrary dictates of power, but because those texts influenced more other texts. And then you think about that as a hierarchy.
This is a very interesting issue that Peterson has brought up, the idea of fundamental text to society. And his hypothesis seems to be that a fundamental text, which influences other texts and therefore is the most fundamental text, is therefore the text that shapes society. What if fundamental texts were fundamental not because they shaped society, but because they reflected society? What if Christianity in the West was so popular and so relevant, even when it came to textual records and the way people expressed their beliefs, wasn't because those things were written, but was because those things were believed by the people at the time? It's essentially the academic version of where does morality come from? Well, it comes from the Bible, because in the Bible it says you shall not kill, you shall not steal, you shall not lust after another man's wife, you shall not... oh shit, what's that thing when you tell God to fuck off? Blaspheme. But what if those things were beneficial to society, and so they were things that we naturally came across as a social species, and we codified that into various stories? Those various stories might have different shapes and different cultures around the world because they express them in slightly different ways. We might end up with a world full of different religions that all have very similar moral prescriptions, because that's what it takes to have a relatively peaceful society. Well, then we might look at those things as reflections of society, not the container that created the shape of society. So I think Peterson is wrong here. Thank God, because we're close to the end of his this little section. Where's the climate? Okay, I heard there was batshit stuff, and we haven't got to batshit yet. Like, this is just garden variety. Christianity and the West are synonymous, which strong doubt. Hey, Ring, how's it going?
Turkey, okay, with the Bible at its base, which is certainly the case. Now imagine that's the entire corpus of linguistic production, all things considered. Now, how do you understand that? Like, literally, how do you...
I understand that as a reflection of the beliefs of society, not as the spring from which those beliefs rose up.
understand that? The answer is you sample it by reading and listening to stories and listening to people talk. You sample that whole domain. You build a low-resolution representation of
What
that
the
in
fuck is he talking
inside
about?
you, and then you listen and see through that. And so it isn't that the Bible is true. It's that the Bible is the precondition for the manifestation of truth, which makes it way more true than just true.
So what he's explained there is the function with which people will take presupposed truths, such as the Bible being true, creating a low-resolution image through which you view the world so you can understand the inherent truths that are around you. That is essentially taking the Bible and viewing everything through its lens, which is a way to apply a particular bias to the way you experience and define and describe the world around you, and how you would actually lose access to abilities to determine truth from untruth because you've already presupposed that the Bible is foundational. That is an extremely unacademic method from which one could derive presupposed truth, and one that I think really strikes the heart of Peterson being a complete grifter. He is engaged in the culture war, and he is 100% looking to establish, Christocentric Western values as being the best, most awesomest values in the world, and to support parties that espouse that. And that's going to lead to things like, binary genders, het relationships only, no birth control measures for people. Man, this shit's depressing. I don't know if this is worse than climate change or not. I don't know.
It's a whole different kind of truth. And I think this is not only literally the case, factually, I think it can't be any other way. It's the only way we can solve the problem of perception.
I don't. What was that segment? Where's the crazy shit? We need the crazy shit. We'll just split up the recording. All right, so the next one. Jordan Peterson on getting off benzo. Are there other ones that we didn't see? I know people were responding to videos. Yeah, that one was only 4 minutes, but this one's 9 minutes, mate. And let's be fair, actually. What was the title of that video? Oh no, it was about the Bible. Okay, so it was on topic.
The Joe Rogan experience.
What is it like to be you? Like, what is it like to... And then I know, you've gone through a lot of shit. And this latest thing with getting off of the benzodiazepine, that to me was a real shocker. Because, first of all, I had no idea that you were taking it. And then to find out that it's that difficult to get off of, and then to hear from other people that have tried to get off of it how difficult it is, and then to realize how many people around me have an issue with that stuff. Xanax is a motherfucker. And I didn't know.
This is kind of crazy that Joe Rogan, who has been a fucking warrior against the prominence of vaccinations being considered the foremost way to deal with the virus, the fact that he's not aware of the abuse of prescription drugs like Xanax, like that blows my mind. Like there's an actual pandemic going through people in America. I'm not sure what the status of it is in Australia, but there's an actual pandemic of people that are addicted to a dangerous drug that is being pushed by a for-profit medical industry. And Joe Rogan's like oblivious to it until he has Jordan Peterson on. Yet the COVID vaccine and shit, he's on that shit like white on rice, 100% of the time dedicating his energy to making sure that people are as hesitant to the vaccine as possible while still being plausibly not an anti-vaxxer, which tacit bullshit.
Know what a motherfucker it was until I talked to a friend who is a counselor at a drug rehab center. where he was saying that that is one of the ways that people get locked back into drinking and doing drugs is a psychiatrist will prescribe Xanax. And sober people who get on Xanax all of a sudden start drinking. He said it's super common. He said that
I know
it's one
this.
of the most difficult drugs.
It's not even my fucking job to be like media literate for like the issues facing America. I know this.
To get off of, he said, and this is something that Dr. Carl Hart, who's I love him to death. He's brilliant. He speaks so openly and honestly about drugs, and you know, the guy's a professor at Columbia. He said that there's 2 drugs that will kill you when you get off of them. He goes, it's alcohol and benzodiazepine. Those are the 2 that if you just quit, you'll fucking die. And
Or you wish you would.
meanwhile, they're handing those things out like Tic Tacs.
Yeah. Well, they were regarded as a safe substitute for barbiturates. And you could easily overdose on barbiturates, especially with alcohol.
Well, when did they know? When was it in the literature, the difficulty of detoxing yourself from these?
Very recently.
Really?
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. And when did they start being handed out?
20 years ago.
This is gonna fuel his anti-vax stuff.
Fuck.
More.
So what happened? People just stayed on them?
Often.
I have one good friend that takes it every day and takes it oftentimes with alcohol, which I know you're absolutely not supposed to do. There's not a damn thing I can do about it. This is a friend that I love to death, and I just go, I put my hands up and I go, there's nothing I can do. And he's been on it for more than 10 years.
Yeah, well, I started taking them because I was ill.
Yeah.
You know, and they helped because I
Ill
couldn't
in-
sleep. I
ill in
couldn't
what
sleep
way?
at all. I don't know. I still really don't know.
I really don't want.
This is one of the things, the pressure of being attacked by all these different people and
Oh wait, attacked by people.
the pressure. Why I brought up the fame thing. Do you think that this is one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about? This is why I brought up the fame thing. How much of the pressure of being attacked by all these different people,
And you can blame the
having
pressure
these,
for
people write
his
these,
choices.
horrible articles about you, and I know you read that stuff, which is different from me. I don't read stuff about me, and I think that's helped me tremendously. And that, like, my gauge of how I deal with people is, like I said,
Tucker Carlson doesn't read things about him either.
Man, like, do they not understand the cage that they put themselves in when they choose the people they choose to relate to when it comes to their issue? There's a really fine line. Like, I understand there's a tension between, like, you know, if you are known in this world of asymmetrical communication where people can constantly, you know, send messages out that are visible by everyone, including yourself, that there's a certain level of detachment that is healthy for people that are in that spotlight to have when it comes to, you know, hearing some pretty bad things about themselves. The issue, particularly hearing Tucker Carlson apparently doesn't read stuff about him, is like, doesn't that just lock you into a feedback loop of like, hey, well, I'm only going to listen to the people that are going to tell me yes, so everything's all good and everything's okay. It's, you know, again, that persecution complex that comes with a lot of people where it's like, hey, if you're not making anyone angry, you're not trying hard, like, you know, you're not doing the right thing. Like, you know, people being pissed at you is proof that you're doing something right, which inherently is a broken statement because you could be doing something wrong and you'd get that same outcome. It's not actually a measure of success. And I think it's the same with people like Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, and Tucker Carlson. They have things worth critiquing. There are criticisms that are valid, and I think they should take on board with great gusto that clearly they're never going to because they armor themselves against it. Joe Rogan and Tucker by not reading it. Jordan Peterson, well, let's find out how he does it.
You can tell by the way he communicates. He seems free. You know, there's a burden that people carry around when they read things about themselves. Like Eric Weinstein has that burden sometimes. Mm-hmm. You know, when people read...
Yeah, well, part of the reason... So did I read things about me? Well, yeah, but that wasn't what was stressful exactly. Although it was.
It's
what
a
was
multitude
stressful
of things.
when I first I've had a history of depression, and that runs in my family, and that's probably stems back for me right to the time when I was a kid. And I think when I really got sick in 2016, it was partly a manifestation of that. But at the time, my job was threatened, like actually.
Right. Yeah.
And my clinical practice was threatened. And the Canadian Revenue Agency was after me all at the same time. And they were after me because of a mistake they had made, which they admitted 3 months later. And the college was after me because of a vindictive client who came after me with a pack of lies, but because they were so... And basically I emerged from that unscathed, but that was by no means obvious that that was going to be the case. I was accused of sexual misconduct. And the evidence? When I was dealing with this client, I would turn my wedding ring around.
You'd spin it?
Well, I play with it.
Right. And that was sexual misconduct?
Yeah, well, to her...
Well, no, he got away...
dark
Not
underlying
away, but like...
desire that I wasn't... That was polluting our therapeutic relationship.
I've been doing that with you the whole conversation.
Yeah.
I have this silicone wedding ring.
Yeah, well, I'm going to report... I'd report you if you had...
in there.
Yeah, exactly.
I do that all the time.
Yes, well, there you go. It's really bad. And if there was
Where's
a
my
college
wedding ring?
that governed the behavior of reprobates like you, I would definitely report... No, don't do that. That's terrible,
I
Joe.
stretch it out.
No, that's Freudian to the extreme. Although I don't know what turning...
Jesus.
How could stretching a silicone wedding band be Freudian?
While you're putting your finger in the little hole.
Rubber. Fuck kind of vaginas
well, rubber,
you're dealing with.
Rubber is, that's got... Anyways, we don't have to
Anyway,
go there.
So that was all you had done.
Where's the climate change stuff?
Play with your wedding ring.
Has it been taken down?
And
I really helped her a lot. Like,
well, unfortunately, when you're dealing with people that are extremely troubled, oftentimes they look for external reasons why they're troubled, and they find oppressors.
Well, she was also angry with me because when
Joe Rogan, you started this by looking for external reasons why Jordan Peterson might be struggling and establishing them as why he has struggled in the past.
All this blew up around me. It interfered with my clinical practice, and she had come to rely on our weekly meetings. And so she was angry about being abandoned. And it was really sad because I didn't want to abandon my clients, but I had to stop my clinical practice, which was also very upsetting to me because I had like 20 clients and I knew these people, man. Like I knew these people. Yeah. I'd followed them through thick and thin. And then all of a sudden, so many things piled up around me that I found when I was in a clinical session that I was distracted. So you can't be distracted in a clinical session.
Right.
And so, anyways, what emerged from that, and it was in the middle of the winter and I have seasonal affective disorder, I couldn't sleep at all for quite a long time. And I went to my doctor and I said, I can't sleep. And he gave me a sleeping medication and an anti-anxiety drug. And I took a little bit of the anti-anxiety drug and I could sleep. And my life was pretty stressful and 5 or 6 times a day.
When are we talking about here?
2016.
Okay, so...
Really low. If I stood up, I'd faint. I was fainting 5 or 6 times.
Is this just his benzo stuff?
Both hands and my feet were like completely numb. And I was in like excruciating pain for 2 years, like pain levels that...
Right, this is clearly not what I've heard about. Where is what I've heard about? Did they take down the videos? Hey, Godless Granny, how are you? Good morning, good evening, good morning. We'll do both. I'm so angry if it's gone. Oh, okay, maybe it wasn't on Joe Rogan's channel. Maybe it was on Peterson's channel.
Weird.
5 minutes. All right, let's see. Come on. Bring it home, baby. Whoa. Sorry, that's our video game one.
Weird one. So that one.
What is this potato quality?
Well,
Whoop. Sumimasen. Technical difficulties there. We hit a hitch. Jordan Peterson notes. Wait, where did it go? Ah, here we go. Oh god, white privilege. No, what? Oh my god, this channel uploads like multiple per day. Alright, let's go back to the search results. We what did we do? Oh, we opened up a new tab. God damn it. Don't YouTube blind. Fuck, this opens on a banger too.
Each one is a weird one, so that
well,
one.
That's because there's no such thing as climate, right?
Pack it up. Pack it up. There is no such thing as climate. We cannot look at an aggregate of weather and look at broad seasonal patterns, describe it as climate. Take it home. Debunked.
Everything are the same word. And that's what bothers
Wait,
me.
everything's the same word?
Climate and everything are the same word.
Climate and everything are the
That's
same
what
word.
bothers me about the climate change types. It's like,
That's right. I was annoyed at the quality of this, and I was going to see if there was a HD. That is not 1080p.
this is something that bothers me about it technically. It's like, climate is about everything. Okay.
It's not. It's not. It's not. You're wrong there. Climate is not about everything. Climate is about the broad systemic nature of weather patterns. Like, Jordan Peterson is an academic. He has no excuses for why he cannot understand that there are functional, technical words used in specific disciplines and study areas. So the fact that he discards the fact that climate has a technical interpretation and discards it as, well, climate just means everything, and so it's pointless, it's useless. There's no other description for that than a lie, because Jordan Peterson must, by definition of being a doctor, know better. Yet he chooses to misrepresent it. It's like anytime he talks about any diversity issues, he will pick like some bullshit quota that is a misplaced way of dealing with diversity and claim that that is what diversity is all about, as opposed to what it is actually about, which is dealing with the inherent inequalities that we face at the starting line, not about making sure we all finish at the same part of the race. Okay, yeah, this is clearly the one everyone's been talking about.
But your models aren't based on everything. Your models are based on a set number of variables.
Yeah.
So that means you've reduced the variables.
Listen to Joe. Listen to Rogan's. Oh, yeah. When he's got someone on there pointing out that myocarditis in young boys is more prevalent after COVID than it is after a vaccine, he's like, no, don't believe that. Bring up the study that proves me wrong. Climate denial. Oh, yeah, that's interesting.
Which
yeah,
are
bro.
everything to that set. Well, how did you decide which set of variables to include in the equation if it's about everything? And that's
not about everything.
Criticism. That's like, if it's
No, it's not a criticism. Criticisms have to be salient and actually relevant. That's not a criticism. You're misdefining the term in order to make the term sound like it's meaningless. And then discarding an entire part of science. I don't even know why. Like, what does Jordan Peterson get out of, like, denying climate change? What part of his ideology up until now has had anything to do with the fucking climate? This is, again, why I'm satisfied with placing him in the pipeline to right-wing conservatism, is that he continually seems to be focused on, like, the first video, the Bible is the foundation to understanding the West. Ridiculous.
it's about everything, your models aren't right. Because your models do not and cannot model everything.
What do you mean by everything when you say?
Well, but that's what people who talk about the climate apocalypse claim in some sense. We have
They
to
don't.
change everything.
No one.
It's like everything.
Having to change everything does not then infer that the climate is about everything. I don't find anyone that talks about like climate change policy talks about changing everything. Like, in fact, probably one of the most prominent positions that people have when they talk about dealing with climate change is actually dealing with industry and dealing with power generation sources. It's not about changing everything about modern day life that people have come to accept as normal. The unfortunate reality is that to a certain level, there's been a successful push to remove the responsibility of climate change from organizations, governments, and corporations, and to try and place it on the individual, where people have become conditioned somewhat to believe that their individual choices are what will make the difference between climate change and, a stable future. But that's not the case. Like, there's no like, no matter how many paper straws I use, or no matter how many times I take my reusable bag to the grocery store, that's not going to prevent climate change that's being caused by mass production and fossil fuels and just this ridiculous level of manufacturing that is going on without proper regulation or guidelines to ensure that they are accurately pricing their products in alignment with the cost to the planet. So again, misrepresentation of the problem he's trying to denounce. He cannot actually present the people he disagrees with in a light that is like even close to relevant to the actual positions people have. And instead he'll sit here and say climate apocalyptists who just want us to change everything.
Everything, eh? Okay, what? And the same with the word environment. That word doesn't mean... It means so much that it...
There are words which describe concepts. And those concepts can be broad in that there are lots of them. So an environment is a concept of the conditions. I don't want to say material conditions because that's got different connotations in different circumstances, but the physiological expression of the space around a person, including, you know, the weather, the flora, the fauna. Like, that's an environment. And that describes all spaces on Earth, because everything is environment. So when we say environment, it's not because we mean everything. It's because we're looking at spaces with a particular intent as it relates to our understanding. So we look at the urban environment. We want to understand how people and animals and plants are interacting with the city environment. We look at the desert environment. We want to understand, you know, how the weather patterns interact with desert and how plants and animals are able to get what they need out of such a apparently arid environment. Again, doesn't make the word meaningless. What it is a word that is establishing what lens through which are we trying to create an understanding of the particular thing that we're discussing. So you wouldn't go and talk about, for example, social policy when it comes to you know, dealing with wealth distribution. You wouldn't talk about the environment there, because that's not much to do, like, it's not directly to do with the environment. That's going to be a policy lens that we're going to apply to that. How do these people become prominent? Like, how? Like, Peterson just became prominent and relevant because he shat on trans people.
That actually doesn't mean anything. Like, when you say everything, in a sense, that's meaningless, right?
But you're the one saying everything.
Because, well, what are you pointing to? Well, I'm pointing to everything. Well, what's the difference between the environment and everything?
Okay, so everything is basically what we could describe as all things in all ways that we might consider them in totality. So if I want to talk about everything, I can be talking about my anime collection. We can talk about Genshin Impact and whether or not I'm going to get the character I want. We can talk about the lore of Five Nights at Freddy's and the Bite of 87. We can talk about the fact that the Great Barrier Reef is being eroded away and is at risk of dying because of climate change. We can talk about the rising cost of living and the increasing inaffordability. Like, that's everything. Everything, those things make up everything. But if we talk about environment, we're talking about the reef. We're talking about deforestation. We're talking about the rising temperatures. We're talking about the fact that because there are shifts in the climate, we have wet seasons in Australia. So the environments have more flora growing. And when it hits the warmer months, they dry out because of the weather. The climate in that environment means that all that flora that has grown over the wet season is now becoming dry. And when dry things during a hot summer exist in greater amounts than they have previously, when there are fires, bushfires, one might call them, they become more severe because of the total fuel load in that environment. See how I'm talking about an environment? That's the difference between the environment and everything. Because I'm not talking about building fires. I'm not talking about campfires. I'm not talking about lighters. I'm talking about environment-based fuel loads, increasing bushfire severity and occurrence, leading to things like we had in, 2-3 years ago in Australia. Things that are going to become more common and more deadly and more destructive as we continue to get more climate change, causing that feedback loop of more severe wet seasons and more severe hot seasons where everything dries up so that they all burn to shit. And hey, suddenly we have an issue that we've identified that we can then deal with by addressing climate change. Jordan Peterson has already stopped and said, hey, there's no difference between everything and the environment, so what the fuck are you talking about? Thought stopping. And he's a fucking academic. This is what... Pundits are one thing. Like, grifters that just exist to grift are one thing. Like, at least in a way, in a twisted way, they're being honest with what their positions are and why they hold these positions. Peterson, however, he sits there with the air of an academic and presents these as if he has any credence or relevance when it comes to these specific topics. He can't define environment, for God's sake. And yet he's sitting here talking about climate. He can't define climate. Like he got the definition of climate and environment wrong within a couple of minutes talking about climate change. And I got some fucking idiot in my comments in my last video trying to tell me about climate apocalyptus. Funny, I wonder where he got that word from, because fucking Mr. Peterson here.
There's no difference. What's the difference between climate and everything? Well, there's no difference. So this is a crisis of everything? It's like,
yes.
No, it's not. Or if
Yep.
it is, well, if it really is, then...
It is, in the sense that nothing will be the same. And look at his fucking face. Look at his fucking face.
we're done, because we can't fix everything.
Well,
But we have
specifically.
to. The fastest way to make the planet sustainably green and ecologically viable is to make poor people as rich as possible, as fast as we possibly can. Because the thing about poor people is that, well, first of all, they're not resource efficient. They use a lot of resources to produce very, very little outcome.
So that's just wrong. Like, that is 100% incorrect. So there's a statistic that I find very interesting when it comes to the planet, and it's called carrying capacity. And what carrying capacity refers to is what is the capability of the planet to support human life based on the projected consumption rates. Now, we are at, 7 billion people and change? Or is it 8 billion? That's embarrassing, I don't know the number. Whatever number we're at that number. If we calculate the carrying capacity of the planet based on the average Western food diet, I think in this case it's specifically America, but I don't say that without recognizing that Australian consumption is very similar to American consumption when it comes to resources per person. The carrying capacity of the planet is something like 2 to 3 billion people. That is, if everyone ate and consumed power and electricity at the rate that we do in places like America and Australia, we would be more than 2 times over the ability of the planet to sustain that many people. Conversely, we go to the poor people that Jordan Peterson is claiming is not resource efficient, and we look at a country like India, which has a population of 2-3 billion. If people consumed on average at the same rate that people in India consumed all across the world, the carrying capacity of the planet becomes, I think it was 13 million people. So it is not the poor people that are being resource inefficient. It is the rich people that are being resource inefficient. So again, we've got a premise that Jordan Peterson has come to the table and sounded very eloquent in delivering, but he's factually incorrect. Like, he actually doesn't know what he's talking about. He thinks he understands because intuitively we think, well, poor people are inefficient because, poor people have to buy lots of cheap clothes because they keep wearing out. But hey, this rich guy, he's got one nice suit that's going to last him 10 years and he's driving a Tesla. So he is more energy efficient. He is more resource efficient than the poor people who are running a gas guzzler because they can't afford anything better than a $2,000 beater car. But it's wrong. It's intuition. It's not facts. It's feelings. It's not facts. Funny that.
And so that's a problem. Slash and burn agriculture, for example. But even more importantly, when you're insecure on a day-to-day basis, you don't know where your next meal is coming from, you're not paying attention to the broader environment, that hated word, around you. And
funny how Jordan Peterson thinks environment means everything, so it can't be meaningful, and yet he couldn't find a better word to use there. I know he was very derisive of it, but he couldn't replace that word with a better word. Curious, isn't it? Very curious.
you can't even really worry about your children's future in some real sense, because no, you don't understand. Lunch is the future. We don't have lunch, we're hungry, and that goes on for like a month, we're dead. That's the future. So what happens, if you can get resources to the poorest section of the population, as soon as they get to the point where they have some hope of a genuine future, especially for their children, they immediately become concerned about broader environmental considerations. And then the attempt to make the environment habitable and sustainable, that comes up of its own accord at a grassroots level and spreads everywhere. And the evidence for that is clear. And so this is one of the things that...
So it's funny that he's criticizing the mechanism through which people like myself become concerned about the environment. Like, he's 100% correct in that the Maslow's hierarchy of needs establishes that, the level of things you are concerned with rises from immediate needs through to more, I don't want to say spiritual needs, but more ideological needs as you go through the period of like, food, shelter, stability, all the way up to sort of internal actualization when you can be concerned with, things that you believe would be good or things that ideologically appeal to you. That's accurate. What's inaccurate though is then conflating that with rich. Like it's like once you become food stable, once you become shelter stable, that somehow you're now the rich and you're no longer contributing to the effects of climate change. When it's the capitalist class that is at the very pinnacle, the 1% that don't value the environment, they're the ones that are doing the manufacturing and the mining and the consumption that quite frankly is what is tilting the scales to the point where the environment is being absolutely ravaged. To think that the poor person that's buying like cheap shitty food is like worse for the environment than the rich person that's having extravagant opulent food that's brought in from all over the world, and champagne from France and yogurt from Greece, or wagyu from Japan. Like it's batshit insane to think that that's lower level of consumption.
It really bothered me about COP26. So, and that was based in part on this.
What is that?
That was the big climate meeting in the UK just a few months ago. The one where all the COVID rules were suspended so the important people could talk about important things. In any case, I thought if the politicians who were discussing environmental sustainability were serious, especially the left-wing ones.
What left-wing politicians are in power, Peterson? What left-wing politicians are in power? Who are you criticizing there? The left-wing people with environment policy that aligns with what the science suggests is necessary to deal with climate change are not in power. Democrats in America, not left-wing. Labour in Australia, not left-wing. I don't know who Boris Johnson, the opposition party, is to him, because UK politics is just a circus. But yeah, I would suggest that they're also not left-wing either. See, all of these, like Democrats, Labour, they still have links to mining and manufacturing industries that need to change significantly, but that do not change significantly, and they will make sure that even the left-wing parties that I presume he's referring to, they won't pass. I mean, the Build Back Better Act in America, we saw that get like completely destroyed by two people in that party. So I don't think anyone could suggest that the Democratic Party is a left-wing party. And we see the same thing with Labour in Australia. Like they try to appeal to people like me, and they don't actually make the steps necessary to deal with the infrastructure, the mining, and the destruction of land and native land as well. So again, it's a straw man. All this bullshit about lefties. We're not in power. We're not in power. It's ridiculous.
And I say especially because the left-wing ones always say, well, we care about the poor and dispossessed. It's like, do you really? When push comes to shove. It's like, is it the environment or poor people? If your idea is that we have to limit growth to save the planet.
So again, that's not the idea. There is plenty of studies out there that do show a green economy actually would outpace a old fossil fuels economy. Because the thing about a green economy is it requires innovation. And one of the, again, I'm talking about Australia in particular, maybe studies in other countries would have different outcomes. Australia's always been a fairly rich country when it comes to the level of education of our citizens. And we've actually had plenty of evidence to show that if we actually invested in green policies, our economy would actually grow, not contract, because what we actually can do is invest in the technology. And then if you're the first person to figure out how to make water into like some infinite combustible energy, sci-fi stuff here. But if you're the first to do that, you start selling that to the world. And that actually increases the GDP of your country because all that money comes back to Australia. Again, another thing, he's just wrong. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Remember, he's a sociologist or something? He's not an economist. He's not a climate scientist. All these things he's got no training in. It might as well be me sitting in that chair talking to Joe Rogan for all the authority that I would have. And again, it's not that people can't talk about these subjects in public. I think anyone should be able to talk about any subject. It's the fact that he is defended from criticism, or he responds to criticism as being a personal attack, when it's like, you don't know shit about what you're talking about. You just got to actually own up to the fact that you don't know everything about everything. You don't know everything about environment, since apparently environment and everything means the same thing to you. Man.
If we limit growth, poor people starve. Because whenever we put limits on economic development, who suffers? The rich? Are you really? That's what you...
We could make it so the rich would suffer. We can. Like this brain dead assumption that, like, you know, if the economy contracted, the rich won't suffer. The only reason the rich don't suffer when the economy contracts is because they are protected. So one of the major reasons why during COVID that the rich were relatively insulated against economic loss was because a lot of people who are rich, they invest in property, they invest in land, they invest in housing, and that is one thing that is not at all elastic under any circumstances. People always need housing, people always need land, they always need places to be, places to work. And when one of the big COVID one of the big things to help people get through COVID that they implemented in Australia, it was batshit insane, was to put a moratorium on paying back rent or mortgages. The problem is that if you delay mortgages for 6 months, you've added 6 months of interest, because it didn't pause the mortgage, it deferred the payment. And I think that really, like, the people who owned those loans, the people who owned that debt, got like more, and it could have been tens of thousands of dollars more per loan, depending on the maturity of that loan. But like that, helping the small poor people out was not only not at the expense of the rich, it actually enriched the rich in that their capital was able to gain more percentages of interest for nothing. For just like, can you handle 6 months without payment? No worries. Here's an extra $50,000 on top of the debt that this person owes to you in exchange for that deferment of loan payments. I think Peterson needs to have the courage to stand up and question why it is the rich still manage to thrive under these economic conditions that he's proposing, and whether it's a force of nature or whether it's a result of the policies that we have in place to favor the rich over the poor. Maybe a bit of critical thinking around that would be useful.
You think, and you're on the left, you think if you put limits on economic development, the rich will suffer. That runs contrary to every theory that your whole political philosophy is based on. You put limits to growth on, the poor stay poor or get worse. Doesn't matter, because the planet has too many people on it anyways, which it most certainly does not. If you are serious...
It does if you consume at the rate of the West, so we need to address that.
...about the environment, and even vaguely concerned about poor people, all of your policies would be devoted to making the poor rich as fast as possible. But that would violate the anti-capitalist presumption, let's say.
No, it doesn't, because all it does is talk about taking the money from the rich at a higher rate to arguably pay back a fairer amount of tax than they do in order to provide the infrastructure for people that are poorer in the lower levels of income, so that they have better opportunities for social mobility, for jobs, for healthcare, for education. So, for example, we're talking about making making the poor richer. One of those ways might be to ensure they have access to a greater range of education resources. Again, blessing in Australia in a way in that we at least get to defer our student loans to when we are making a certain amount of money, and then we just pay back a certain percentage. So, for example, let's use a rough number because I don't want to give away exactly what my salary is, but I only pay back 5% of my student debts per pay before tax, because I make that much money that I get to that payback bracket. If I was making, I think, $50,000 a year, I think I wouldn't pay back anything because I'm not making enough for the system to kick in. However, the fact that there's a cost associated to education means that I've stopped getting education. So I'm making less money than I maybe could be if I engage in another 2 years of education. There are people 100% that are probably not going to university because of that debt that gets put on them. I mean, it's a huge problem in America because like it's just a fucking loan in America full of loan sharks and shit. So make education free. Society as a whole gets better educated. People get better jobs and able to make more money and able to start more businesses. That's socialized policy. That's not what Jordan Peterson's thinking of, because he's thinking of like reducing the level of competition as opposed to reducing the level of capital consolidation. Because the more people have access to starting their own businesses, the less capital is consolidated in top 5%, 10%.
The reason for environmental degradation in the first place is, say, entrepreneurial and free market development, which it most certainly isn't. That's actually completely backwards. Make poor people rich. So what should a COP26 been about? That's fairly straightforward. It should have been about trying to generate as much energy as we possibly can to be distributed as widely as possible in the cheapest possible manner.
See, and that's a dumbass take as well, because COP26 was explicitly about finding cheap, reliable, alternate solutions to power, because we can't just do what Jordan Peterson said with coal and oil. We need to do it with energy sources that have a lower carbon emission. Like that's non-negotiable. And that's what COP26 was about. So he doesn't even accurately reflect the reality of COP26 when like is there anything he critiques that he gets correct, that he critiques accurately the core of the issue that he is trying to critique? I used critique there too much.
And what would that be? Nuclear?
No, well, I would say ultimately likely nuclear, and probably not fusion, because it's so, fusion has always been a year away, 10 years away for the last 50 years. We haven't managed it. Nuclear, likely.
Which one is a weird?
I feel like I'm on crazy pills because like everyone's really horny over nuclear these days. I feel right. 100% I feel this at the moment because I didn't plan this stream around energy sources and stuff. I feel like there's a vested interest in promoting nuclear as the next power source because it is the longest away in terms of getting it built up and getting it actually put in place. And it's also the most likely new power source to have pushback from, people. The reality is that a lot of people probably don't want to live near a nuclear power plant. Now, whether or not that's fair or accurate compared to the technological state isn't as relevant as the PR nightmare that nuclear has. Like, it's not even that we just look back at places like Chernobyl. We look back in like relatively recent memory, the disaster in Fukushima, where those power plants were supposed to be ridiculously safe, but then a tsunami and an earthquake hit at the same time and it overcome all the safety measures they put in place. And it's the subtle risk of always being the contingency that we didn't have a contingency plan for is the contingency that comes to bear. So there's like a very difficult policy platform to navigate to be successful in implementing nuclear as well. On top of the fact that it takes, like, you don't just build a nuclear plant and have it up and running, in 1 year, 2 years. You need to build it plus the infrastructure plus the source for the materials that are going to be consumed in the nuclear plant. I think there's been a vested interest in making sure that is considered the primary new fuel source. Despite the fact that renewables like solar and wind, geothermal, hydro, all exist and are all infinitely capable of ramping up over the next 10, 20, 30 years, which is the same time frame you would need to implement a nuclear power grid. And whenever you get in these discussions, it always comes down to people assuming that you think that nuclear isn't safe or nuclear isn't viable, and it's not the case that I think any of those things. It's that I think that you're underestimating solar and wind and actual renewables. Like nuclear is not a renewable; it's just super efficient with the material that we have access to for a long time. But anyway, unpopular opinion, and people will just write it off as I'm an idiot, so it doesn't really matter anyway. But so that was Jordan Peterson's climate take. Hey. Selling your body to avoid student debt is I mean, we can do the same in Australia. So if we join the reserves, we can actually get a degree for free. Like they'll cover the cost of tuition and stuff. But yeah, like again, you've got to spend a certain amount of time. I remember when I was young, I was pretty keen on joining the ADFA, the Australian Defence Force Academy. But funny story, right? When I was young, it's like, I want to be a pilot. I want to fly jet planes. And my eyesight's not great. Maybe I'll just be a navigator in the back seat. Can't even drive a fucking car. There's no way that was ever going to happen. Oi, 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 oi. All right, I want to see. It's probably not going to be anything worth looking at, but I want to see on the Joe Rogan channel, there was something about Jordan Peterson and the Joker. I just feel like that's just... There's got to be comedy there, right? Man, Jordan Peterson's... Shut up. Experience. Jordan Peterson's climate take was horrible. So, to recap, climate is everything, so it's not real. Environment is everything, so it's not real. The poor people create more pollution than the rich people. And if you were leftists that actually wanted to deal with it, then you would be trying to make poor people rich. Which, in a explain it to me like I'm five sort of way, is true. But not in the way that Jordan Peterson thought, in that it would mean increasing capitalist endeavors. Because it wouldn't. It's about decentralizing capitalist holdings so that more people have access to the means of production, as it were, which is capital in 2022. Insane. All right. Okay, let's have a look. Quick video. Jordan Peterson on the Joker. Like, come on, this is going to be satire, because this is just going to be Peterson's Joker moment, right? Surely.
I just watched Joaquin Phoenix in Joker.
Mm-hmm.
Joaquin Phoenix, isn't it?
He's a very charismatic actor. And I was thinking, oh God, because he carried that whole movie on single-handedly. It's a dark, dark movie, and it has to do with resentment. This man who was forced to be nice by his mother, who turns out to be absolutely crazy and abused him like mad when he was a kid. And,
spoilers alert.
This role model for the dissemination of complete catastrophe into the entire society. It's a story of Cain in part, but Phoenix really carried.
Is it a story of Cain? God, he's going back to his Bible roots.
That, and part of the reason that he does that is because he creates a compelling character who's sympathetic. Like, you can be sympathetic to him because he really did have a hard life, like really hard. But Phoenix,
he sees himself in this.
Extraordinarily charismatic person, partly because he's so unbelievably, he's masculine in his features and carved, but he's so graceful. Every single thing he does in the entire movie is a dance. Like, he's conscious of every single movement he makes. Every turn of his head is conscious. It's dance-like, and you can't take your eyes off it. And a lot of stellar performers had that ability to integrate, male performers had that ability to integrate.
Male performers, just in case you thought the women could do this too.
That feminine grace into their masculine character.
I'm so glad that you uploaded that, Joe. Joe, thank you. I wish I had Spotify so I could see the rest. I really do. That is fantastic.
In the Liberal Party.
Shut up. This is not anything to do with you, Geordie. Not anything to do with you. So, tacitly related to all this is currently there's been a bit of a stir with people cancelling and no longer using, or boycotting, if you will, Spotify because of broadly Joe Rogan. Not specifically to do with the fact that he spoke with Jordan Peterson. I mean, that is just a circus by itself where, like, holy shit, any time Peterson's given oxygen is just ludicrous and, worth mockery and a little bit of bullying. But broadly, because of Rogan's COVID misinformation, there's been a bit more of a push to a split over people thinking whether or not it's socially acceptable for Joe to have a platform where he can talk about resistance to having vaccines. Like, I mean, his most famous piece is talking about how young people are so unlikely to get sick from the virus that there's no need for them to have the vaccine, completely neglecting to consider the implications of them simply as a vector of transmission, and that, it can go from, someone who is immunocompromised to a healthy 21-year-old who feels no effect and recovers after a week, to someone else who is immunocompromised because they chose not to get the vaccine and chose not to reduce the risk of them being a vector. It seems to be really common when it comes to people who are talking about whether or not vaccinations should be taken by the young, the healthy, the virile chads of society, is always focused around what is the specific outcome for them specifically, individually, whether they take the vaccine or not. And they don't actually consider that as, okay, well, what are the ramifications for society as a whole if someone individually chooses not to take the vaccine? And it's a force multiplier, and that, like, my decision to vaccine or not vaccine impacts theoretically everyone that I might have come in contact with for the rest of my life. Like, those sides of the scales are very, very imbalanced in my perspective towards all the people that I might interact with in the future. That's never part of the never part of the rationale when people are saying, well, if they're healthy and fit, then they don't need to worry about getting sick themselves. So it's that very one-dimensional thinking that I think props up a lot of people who are anti-vax. And I say that clearly, that it is anti-vaccination. It is an anti-vax stance to be supportive of people being, hey, it's your choice to get vaccinated, and if you choose not to get vaccinated, well, that's fine, it's your choice. That is anti-vaccination, because vaccination's a public good. It's a social tool that doesn't work for individuals, it works for collectives. Because of Joe's constant questioning of vaccine injuries, comorbidities with vaccine, I suppose it's vaccine injuries, and the desire for people to make money off vaccinations, and the relatively harmless nature of COVID in particular demographics, people are starting to get a bit sick of it, which I think is really fair. And so people have started to post their goodbyes to Spotify, which I think has been really cool. I'm curious if it's still... Why the fuck is Destiny trending? I don't want to know. Maybe it's not trending. Why do I start topics without checking that the topic's still relevant? I mean, Peterson probably wasn't relevant anymore, because that happened like a while ago. And like I said, I missed the Friday stream, so we tried it. We decided to run with it again today. Anyway, I'm going to cut that short by saying, like, hey, Joe Rogan's not being cancelled because there is pressure for people, pressure from people for him to no longer be propped up by Spotify. Like, particularly given that there's a list going around of books that have been recently banned in some schools in America by conservatives. It's quite interesting to me that there are conservatives that are complaining about Joe Rogan being cancelled, and that is like what? If Spotify dropped Joe Rogan, what is the outcome? Does Joe Rogan lose reach? No. Joe Rogan will continue to do the Joe Rogan podcast and will likely continue to get just as many viewers as he does now. He just won't be in a publishing arrangement or contract where he's getting paid by Spotify as well. And Joe Rogan's already incredibly wealthy. And so the idea that he can't continue to consolidate that wealth becomes cancellation because he says something that is unpopular with the customers of the service that are paying him to be on their service. It's just funny to me. Like, isn't that the free market? Isn't that capitalism? Isn't that competition? Like, okay, let's pretend the Super Nintendo still exists and they're still selling games for $100. I can go and buy a Switch game for $100. Well, that product's no longer the Super Nintendo product is no longer. This is a bad example because retro games are getting more expensive. But a product will become less competitive over time because it no longer is innovative, it's no longer interesting, and it no longer gets stocked by suppliers or retailers. And I think entertainment and punditry is no different. So Joe Rogan is a product that Spotify has to try and increase its visibility to a larger range of customers because of the audience that he has. And so they sell as part of their service, hey, you get access to the Joe Rogan podcast. That product's getting less popular because Joe Rogan's becoming less innovative. Joe Rogan's becoming less critical in the ways he approaches the topics that he became famous for dealing with, in terms of, hey, I'm just a stoner bro, just having a chat, mind so open that my brain can fall out. And suddenly that brainless approach to topics has led him down a rabbit hole of COVID misinformation, and so he has become less popular. And so when you have a widely published deal where Spotify entered into, $100 million in order to obtain Joe Rogan as a exclusive on their platform, and people start to equivocate between, hey, Spotify and Joe Rogan are, supporting one is supporting the other, and no longer wanting to support, honestly, dangerous. Like, Joe Rogan's platform was so big that there is no way that I would be able to be led to believe that he has not had a negative impact on someone, explicitly leading to death when it comes to making decisions to not take the vaccine and then people actually dying. And I think that's a fair thing to then, have as a concerned consumer and choose not to consume that particular service. It's funny that, if people stop buying a product because a product was harmful, that product would get recalled. And no one would say, hey, those E. coli sausages just got cancelled. The left-wing loonies are at it again and they just love their cancel culture. Yet when someone spreads an idea that is so bad and so harmful that it actually, statistically, when you start dealing with the numbers that we get to when we think about the audience Joe Rogan has, statistically leads to harm. Suddenly criticizing that and saying that shouldn't be made, that shouldn't be platformed by the type of businesses I want to deal with, suddenly that's cancel culture. It's ridiculous. I mean, what else can you say besides that? It's ridiculous. I just feel that, there's a difference between the quality of cancellation when it comes to left and right. The left will... See, this is always tricky because there are batshit crazy people everywhere, and that sounds like an enlightened centrist bullshit take. But, it's easy to pick out the worst people on either side and use that to build a case for why cancel culture is bad, and it's worse on the left than it is on the right. I think, if you look at the core members of, who is speaking from each side and who they speak to, that tells you a lot about who is acting in better faith than the other. And I honestly think that when the left looks to deplatform and cancel people, they're usually doing it for harmful bigotry, harmful bigoted takes. So Israel Folau in Australia, you know what? Fuck him out of the NFL. The NFL is there. It is a place that it has a high degree of cultural relevance in Australia, and that there's a lot of kids that watch sport in Australia. It's a national pastime, and they're going to learn and take from people that are elevated by the NFL. And so when those people start using that platform that's granted by the very fact that they're part of the NFL to spread bigotry about, you're going to go to hell if you're a drunk, an atheist, gay, trans, that's not okay, you can define it as cancellation, but it's justified. I think as a community we can come together and say that's not the sort of speech we want elevated to the point where children are going to consume that, and they're going to have to struggle with whether or not that's right because they look up to their sports idols, and so they might be a little less critical of those ideas, and then suddenly we've got actual harm being perpetrated in society where we're going backwards on things that I think, in a naked conversation on the topics without getting caught up into the culture stuff, you'd find only the most bigoted right-wingers would concede that it is bad to be that level of bigot. Whereas then on the right, you've got people complaining that, we want to, prevent as much COVID misinformation from getting out by not platforming people who spread COVID misinformation. And suddenly that's equated to people hating on people because of immutable characteristics. Like, I'm sorry, your willingness to follow health advice and to take a vaccine is not immutable in the same way that some of these other attributes are. Hey Mick, what's going on? Happy Sunday. Even if they didn't invent it, I know, because there'll be contention about that. Not that I disagree. They certainly perfected it, especially with the green M&M. Come on, they cancelled M&Ms because the green M&M is not fuckable. Now, I am not one to criticize another person for having fetishized fictional characters, right? Like I Glass House and all that. The M&M, however, that might be across the line, even for me. But hey. Anyway, it is. Holy shit! It's 11:15. I think that's me for tonight. I've got to say, I was expecting more. The amount of Twitter discourse around Peterson and Rogan, around the climate change thing, led me to believe that it was a lot. Well, not that it was a lot more. It was patently ridiculous, but it was garden variety climate denial. And it wasn't even like creative. Was it creative? I suppose it is pretty creative to say, hey, climate means everything, and environment means everything, and so they're not real words. Like that. Okay, that's pretty creative, I guess. But yeah. Oh, anyway, I've got to work tomorrow, and I've got a slight headache. I know I'll play some more Pokemon. Mick, I'm going to send you a link to a game on Steam, or a link to a clip of a game on Steam. I think you'll get a kick at least out of maybe watching it on YouTube or not. But anyway, I'm out. See you all next time, and have a good week. I'll try and be Friday next week. We'll see if we can build up a schedule so we actually get people dropping in regularly instead of whenever. It's tough, Games come out all the time, and we get distracted with Pokemon. Bye-bye. I didn't stop streaming. I pressed a different button, so bye-bye again. I'll even do this.